What's up, everybody, and welcome to another video. In today's video, I am maybe somewhere slightly less windy. We're going to find out, won't we? But today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of pinsless designs in balisongs, because I think pinsless designs are really interesting. Oh, there go a couple dudes on motorcycles. Oh, yeah, very nice. Pinsless designs are really interesting because, I think aesthetically for me, they look really nice. I like not having to have a whole ass Tang area. But unfortunately, to make a pinsless design actually work, because that's what today's topic is about, you kind of have to have a whole Tang area. And with this balisong, you don't. And there is a good reason for that, and it's because it's all the same material, right? So you're not hitting two materials that are different hardnesses together and one of them is digging into one another. Instead, the idea, and to be fair, Squid has, they've told me they put this through a lot of testing before releasing it to the public, so hopefully this will continue to hold true just because of all that testing they've done. But due to the thickness and the way this was created, and then the fact that these materials are the same hardness, the idea is that they will hit one another and then sort of bounce off without plastic deformation happening. Now, what is plastic deformation? Plastic deformation is when one surface collides with another surface, or just two materials collide together, and one of them pushes into the other one. That is plastic deformation. It's deformation that doesn't spring back. I believe the one that springs back is elastic deformation, where it will become deformed and then return to normal. So either way, a balisong and a material in a balisong can suffer from plastic deformation, which is when it gets crushed and changes volume, essentially. And so the idea behind this is to keep that from happening, because none of the materials are harder than the other. Therefore, you're able to sort of have that deformation happen without it being permanent. Now, a different way to approach this is with a very large Tang area. So this is the JW magnet, and it is not a pinsless design, as you can see from the pins, but it does have a very large triangle here. That is the Tang area. And similarly, this one, it doesn't have a large triangle, but it does have a, protrusion in the Tang area. And that's exactly what we're talking about right now. Compared to the Squid Industries swordfish, which is almost entirely flat. So, you can see a pretty distinct difference here. I like what Maxace did with this. It's very, very minor, but it is still a protrusion regardless. What I'm getting at is that the only way a pinsless system can really work, at least from what I've seen and from what people have experienced, is it either needs to be made in a way to work like this, where it won't have different materials colliding with one another, or it needs to be made in a similar vein to how Zen pin systems already work. And the reason I say this is because Tang pins also work, right? So, what is the difference between Tang pins and a pinsless system? The difference is that the Tang pins themselves, which are just an extension of the blade, that is a harder metal contacting titanium, so you should have a similar problem of deformation. And the truth is that you do have a similar problem of deformation. Over time, those pins do in fact eat into the titanium. It just takes a long time for that to happen, but it does happen over a long enough period of time. But this is the key of things, right? So even though that happens, even though you do see deformation in there, and you can actually see it even a little bit on this balisong, just straight up right there, the reason that it doesn't ever close is because the amount of deformation that happens is very, very, very small. And there is still a physical piece of metal between both handles. And there's almost no world in which enough deformation can happen to this titanium that it would completely engulf the pin itself, right? Like it would be extremely hard for the titanium to completely, crunch around the piece of metal like a tree eating a stop sign or whatever, It's just extremely unlikely and something that's like not really going to happen in any realistic scenario. So, the reason that I find that interesting is because a similar thing is true when looking at something like the Maxace Apostle or the JK Designs Orca or a lot of other modern pinsless designs. You see, the idea behind these designs is no longer like it was with the Monarch. The Monarch was flawed inherently because it was completely flat along the top. Having a completely flat top meant that the contact area for the balisong, it was coming in and hitting against that flat top. Like if this is the pin, this is the top, the pin was coming in and hitting against that flat top, right? And it was smacking into that pretty hard. But the other thing to note here is that because of the location of that piece that it was hitting, because it was flat against here, the smallest change in terms of the thickness of the part that it was hitting, that small change was enough to make it where the handles could touch one another. So why is this different? Well, and why is the Orca different? Well, if you look at the design of both, you'll actually notice that they have a metal something in the way. On the Orca, it's literally a triangular design. Like, it protrudes about that far and literally has a big-ass triangle. But if you look closely at it, you'll notice there is a piece of metal physically between both of the handles. There is something that both handles would need to somehow crush enough to completely cover this piece of metal for it to fail in the same way that the Monarch did. And so that's what I'm getting at, is that actually, physically speaking, this is a very similar system to how Tang pins work at their core. Because there is a physical piece of metal to separate both of the handles, it's much more likely that it will last, at least for a very long time, than it will fail in such a catastrophic way that it will fully encapsulate and enclose around the metal. So here you can see a great example of that. When I open this up, this little piece right here actually physically sticks out between both the handles. You can see that in there. It physically separates them with a piece of metal that is actually like longer than the part that it's contacting. What that means is that over time, as the part crushes, because it will inherently have some sort of deformation, as that deformation happens, you're not having to worry nearly as much about it completely failing, because there will continue to be more material for it to contact with, right? You're not like immediately running out of material because of the deformation. The deformation keeps itself in place because there is more material physically separating both of the handles. On the Monarch, there was no material here, and that was the big flaw. Because there was no material there was no way to physically separate these two halves. And so, therefore, there was no way that once it failed along the flat, once there was even like a fraction of a millimeter difference in terms of the depth of the titanium due to how much it was flipped, that was enough to make it be a problem. And so this is exactly what I'm getting at, right? My Maxace Apostle, I have flipped it a lot, and I have seen absolutely no difference in the depth of the handle gap, right? And I think it's because they took these principles of having physical separation between the handles using a piece of metal. Even if it's really small like this, it does appear to be physically working very well. And so that, I think, is the key to having a pinsless design that actually functions rather than one that fails catastrophically pretty early on. This is something that I think is just super important to kind of think about. I don't think pinsless designs are inherently flawed. I just think that they're misunderstood, and I think that understanding them better will help us create more interesting balisongs in the future, because I think pinsless designs are honestly very cool. I think that they have a lot of intriguing uses. But it's important to understand why and how they might work rather than just assuming they're all bad or assuming that they'll work without any further research. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Pinsless Balisongs. I hope that you can kind of see what I'm saying in terms of there being a physical piece of metal to separate the handles, which is just very different than there being a flat back to the balisong where there's absolutely no end bit, where there's absolutely no nipple or whatever. I just don't think that that really has a possibility of working properly on a pinsless design, unfortunately. Even though I would really like it to. Like, I would really love it to work perfectly on a pinsless design. I just don't think it can. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but I also just think that's the nature of things, and we kind of gotta do with it what we can. So, you know, that's more of an oh well than it is anything else. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Pinsless Balisongs. I've got the two with me here today, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. I appreciate you guys for watching. I hope you learned at least something from this, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Anyways, I'll see you later. Peace.